The day Preston Vane strolled into the compliance meeting and called my team background noise with dental plans. I knew the company was on a slow march towards self-destruction. He had that smug MBA energy, his collar popped, his hair gelled like he was prepping for a cologne advertisement, and his eyes scanning the organizational chart like he was shopping for layoffs. As the son of our chief financial officer, Donald Vane, Preston was a newly minted director of strategic optimization, whatever that title was supposed to mean. He did not shake hands when he entered the room. Instead, he gave air fives, threw out buzzwords like synergy swing, and talked about cutting the fat while sipping a $7 smoothie as if he had personally invented the spreadsheet. No one had asked him to speak at that meeting, but no one stopped him either. He clacked through a presentation slides titled Efficiency Targets, Phase 1. That Phase 1, as it turned out, was me. I had been the named compliance officer for 7 years. That was 7 years of building risk controls from duct tape and prayer, watching potential security breaches brush past us like distant tornadoes, and documenting every nightmare scenario a cloud vendor could toss our way. I had 2 external audits under my belt that finished with 0 flags. In my office, I kept a physical folder labeled with instructions to read before firing me, but no one had ever bothered to open it. Preston did not even know what the compliance certification meant. I had watched him look it up on his phone during the meeting. That morning, as he stood there grinning in his father's hand-me-down luxury watch, he called compliance an internal support function and suggested we automate oversight using a basic software bot. He declared my department and my team redundant and overstaffed. We can save $44,000 per year in savings, he bragged to the room. He claimed that was a bonus tier for the executives. Someone in the back chuckled. I did not. I just capped my pen and asked if we were finished. Preston left the meeting with a spreadsheet and a smug little nod. I returned to my office and opened a clean binder. It was not rage that drove me, and it was not a desire for immediate revenge. It was simply protocol. I started backing up my files. I documented every access token, every compliance designation, and every clause where my name appeared as a legal linchpin. Most of the company did not realize that the entire audit cycle still hinged on my formal designation. Every renewal, every quarterly submission, and every single checkmark had my name, Julian Finch, next to it as the sole authorized contact. No one had replaced me, and no one could do so without notifying the board and filing a formal reassignment. But Preston did not know that, and his father Donald did not bother to check. At first, I thought someone in leadership would stop this train. I thought HR would hesitate, or that the chief executive officer, Richard Thorne, who once called me the company's firewall, might raise his hand. But nothing happened. In fact, HR sent over a reclassification form 2 days later. My new title was Compliance Coordinator. My access was restricted, and my invitations to the leadership sinks disappeared overnight. I nodded and made no complaints. I even congratulated Preston in the hallway when he bragged about hitting his first efficiency milestone. He gave me finger guns and called me by a nickname. So, I printed the original compliance designation letter, signed by the board of directors back in the year 2021, and emailed it to my personal account, time-stamped and sealed. Then, I printed 2 physical copies. One went into my personal archive at home, and the other went into a binder labeled Continuity Risk, Do Not Shred, which I dropped quietly into the shared legal file room. I did not tell a soul. People assume that revenge is a loud affair, filled with screaming, slamming doors, and long speeches about appreciation. But no one appreciates a fuse until it is already lit. It was a Tuesday when the final blow landed, the kind of day that smelled of burnt coffee and crushed dreams. Preston, wearing his favorite quarter-zip sweater and his father's cologne, clicked to slide 6 of his presentation, as if he were revealing a miracle cure. The slide was titled Operational Streamlining Phase 1 Targets. I sat dead center at the table, flanked by 2 members of my now doomed compliance team, already sensing the guillotine behind his phrasing. My left eye twitched the moment I saw my own department name under the targeted redundancies column. He did not even spell my name right, listing me simply as the oversight lead. Good morning, everyone, he began as if we were discussing a lunch menu. I have identified our first big win. Compliance, as we know, is increasingly digital. Automated tools now mean we do not need as many boots on the ground. We can sunset 2 full-time roles, consolidate functions, and reclassify the oversight position for projected annual savings of $44,000. He looked up and smiled, adding that it was almost the cost of a luxury car lease. I stared at him in silence. Nobody laughed, but a few weak chuckles crawled out from the marketing department. He moved on without missing a beat, stating that we would transition oversight to an automated dashboard. "You will still have visibility, Julian," he said, gesturing toward me like I was an office plant. "You are not being let go, just releveled." Releveled. I felt like a poorly tuned character in a video game. "Compliance is about frameworks," he continued, "not faces." It was then I realized that Preston did not understand what I did, and no one was going to stop him. Instead of protesting, I uncapped my pen, wrote the word sunset on the margin of my notepad, and dotted the letter Y in the word liability just for fun. Then I smiled. It was a small, professional, and lethal smile. I simply said that I understood. No protest, no speech. Just the quiet clicking of my laptop closing as I rose from the table and left the room. Preston looked confused as if he expected a trophy. I went straight to my office and began downloading every single audit record from the past 4 years. This included our SOC 2 protocols, access logs, and change management trails. I encrypted a copy on my personal drive and saved another onto a physical drive. Next, I printed the version history of our business continuity plan. Specifically, I printed Section 9.7, which no one ever read because it was buried under boilerplate text. It outlined the requirement that a named compliance officer must be officially reassigned within 14 calendar days, or the designation becomes invalid. It was my clause. I had added it 2 years ago after watching a startup eat a 7-figure penalty for mishandling their transition. I had signed that version and the board approved it. Brenda from HR called later that day to confirm my new role alignment. She said my new duties included document hygiene and process visibility. I said that was fine and kept my old badge. That night, I stayed late. I printed and labeled the binder with my designation letters and audit trails. I clipped a note that read "Continuity risk, do not shred," and placed it on the bottom shelf in the legal file room. There were no witnesses, just me and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. Then I went home and made tea. I was not being erased. I was being loaded like a spring. Let them think I went quietly, that their savings were worth the fuse I had just armed. 3 days after the restructuring, HR sent me a fruit basket. It was an actual wicker basket, wrapped in tight plastic, with pineapple chunks sweating through a plastic container. A little card was tucked inside that said, "We appreciate your flexibility during this exciting time of change." Something with a smiley face from Brenda in People Ops. I stared at it for a full minute before sliding the entire basket into the break room refrigerator. The vibe around the office had shifted. It was light, almost festive. My colleagues avoided eye contact with me. Preston strutted around the office corridors like he had personally solved inflation. He started calling me by a nickname. That alone should have triggered a warning, but nothing did, because from their point of view, I was taking the transition well. I did not send angry messages, and I did not email the board. I just sat in my corner cubicle, printing documents, smiling politely, and asking for extra folders. The truth was, I had unplugged emotionally. My brain felt as if it were underwater, but I was not checked out. I was watching and listening. At one point, I overheard Preston in the kitchen, bragging to the chief financial officer's executive assistant. He said I would be out in 3 weeks and that they had saved $44,000 easily. He actually fist bumped someone over my reduction, celebrating the elimination of the system that kept their entire legal compliance tethered to the law. Meanwhile, the legal department had not asked a single question. There was not one request for formal transition logs, designation updates, or risk realignment. They just filed my status change and moved on, as if my position were a flavor of coffee and not the single point of contact for our most critical regulatory framework. That afternoon, I logged into our certification portal and pulled the contact record. Julian Finch, Executive Compliance Officer, named contact, board approval date March 12, 2021. It was still active and still binding. I exported the record and forwarded it to my personal email. I submitted my resignation on a Thursday morning at 7:12. It was early enough to beat the human resources rush, but late enough to ensure it would land in Brenda's inbox just as she was drinking her second cup of coffee. It was a simple, one-sentence message stating that effective 2 weeks from that day, I would be stepping down from my position as compliance officer. That was it. No farewell lunch, no announcements, and no cringy messages. I boxed up my desk in silence, leaving behind a mug Preston had once gifted me. They revoked my digital access before the end of the day, calling it standard security protocol. I wanted to laugh because the IT ticket was so rushed that they forgot to disable my calendar visibility. I could still see the board strategy meetings, with my name removed and Preston's name bolded. That weekend, I updated my professional profile on the compliance registry. I set my certification to active executive designation relinquished and uploaded my resignation's acceptance. I was ready. By the following Monday, I had signed a 6-month consulting agreement and established a quiet desk in a local co-working space with reliable wireless internet and mediocre coffee. The receptionist there was named Darla. She was a warm woman who called everyone by a term of endearment and kept a glass bowl stocked with butter candies like it was still the late 90s. I did not unpack very many personal items. I only laid out my laptop, my connection hub, and the external storage drive containing the files they thought had vanished with my building key card. My former employer went on without a single ripple. There were no urgent messages, no pulse checks, and no backward glances. I was just another name taken off the payroll, representing a small holiday party budget. But what they did not see, and what they flatly refused to acknowledge, was that I was not their weak link. I had been their sole linchpin. Without a formal handoff, the compliance audit trail remained incomplete. Without a formal board notification, the official regulatory filings still bore my name. And without a designated officer, the audit clock was ticking with a dead battery. Somewhere buried deep in a shared database folder that no one had opened in months, the clause they had ignored sat waiting. If the name compliance officer is removed and not officially reassigned within 14 calendar days, the company enters automatic non-compliance. Fines retroactive and escalating would be triggered not by a security breach, but by the very absence they had created. I did not remind them. I did not warn them. Let Preston brag about his efficiency metrics. Let the chief executive officer, Richard Thorne, sip his expensive liquor in ignorance. Let the legal department rest easy under their illusion of process because they had not replaced me. They had simply erased me. And like any eraser, it left a blank space that was waiting to catch fire. 3 months out from the scheduled sale, the main office looked like a movie set, dressed for a billion-dollar production. Conference rooms were booked weeks in advance, and the break room refrigerator was replaced with a luxury model. Suddenly, everyone had fresh business cards and professional headshots. Even Preston swapped his synthetic leather portfolio for an expensive notebook that he never actually wrote in. He walked through the hallways like a man who had personally invented the concept of corporate mergers. In a way, I suppose he believed he had. The $358 million sale was his golden opportunity to prove that his optimization strategy was more than just empty buzzwords and layoffs. The buyer, a much larger conglomerate named Apex Holdings, was known for acquiring lean startups, and they loved his presentation. He spoke of aggressive streamlining, high-margin pivots, and compliance as an automated service. He even coined the phrase ops-light resilience, which was corporate speak for firing critical staff and praying that nothing broke. The due diligence process kicked off in a flurry of activity. Preston was made the primary point of contact for the operational review, which meant he spent his days in meetings with the buyer representatives. He nodded along to technical questions he did not understand, smirking every time someone mentioned compliance. The internal legal team kept reassuring the board that everything was moving on schedule. Except it was not, because deep in Apex Holdings' legal suite, an underpaid but highly qualified junior paralegal named Chloe was combing through the archive personnel's logs. She had only been assigned to the file because someone else had called in sick that day. Chloe picked up the review trail methodically. She was not searching for anything specific, just reconciling the names of contacts across the various compliance protocols. That was when she found the discrepancy. The registry listed Julian Finch as the named compliance contact officer, approved by the board, signed and valid through the current fiscal year. Yet Julian Finch was nowhere on the current payroll list. Nor was there any board motion appointing a replacement, no transition log, and no updated designation. It was a missing piece in what was supposed to be a seamless legal puzzle. Chloe flagged the discrepancy in a footnote and added it to the minor gaps section of her report, assuming that a senior attorney would take a closer look. But no one did. The audit team skimmed past it, and the legal team marked it as low risk because it did not directly involve revenue. Preston glanced at the compliance section and scribbled handled in the margin before uploading the files to the buyer portal. For a few weeks, everything hummed forward. Press releases were drafted, and Richard Thorne booked a vacation to Italy. Preston started talking about moving to the buyer headquarters as a strategic leader. Human Resources began preparing severance schedules for the departments that would not survive the merger. I watched all of this unfold from my tiny co-working desk, sipping my coffee while Darla complained about someone stealing her stapler. I was not bitter. I was simply waiting because I knew what they did not. Compliance is not just a checklist. It is a certification tethered to a living, breathing human being. On the eve of the closing, the boardroom smelled of triumph. There was a catered breakfast, fresh-cut flowers, and gold-foiled folders. The team from Apex Holdings had flown in, ready to sign the $358 million deal. Preston wore a new navy blazer that was one size too small, and a smug expression that was two sizes too big. He rehearsed phrases like post-close integration cadence in the hallway mirror. Someone had even reserved him a seat at the main table with a name placard designating him as the Director of Transitional Operations. It was a non-existent title, but no one corrected it. He paced the hallway outside the room with his phone glued to his ear, fielding minor questions from the legal department as if he were coordinating a major military operation. Everyone assumed he had this under control, but everyone was wrong. Downstairs in a glass-walled side room, the buyer's legal team called an unscheduled pause. The reason was page 43 of the compliance trail, where my name, Julian Finch, was still listed as the executive of record responsible for all audit compliance. The buyer's compliance counsel, a woman named Clara Mercer, with a voice like an ice cube sliding across steel, asked who Julian Finch was. Preston was summoned down to explain. He smiled and said that I had been restructured out of the organization and that they had transitioned those duties internally. Clara did not smile back. She asked where the official documentation was, such as the board resolution replacing me, the updated designation logs, and the formal reassignment memo. She noted that these files should have been submitted within 14 calendar days of my removal. Preston blinked and stammered, stating that it was handled because they had been managing compliance as a collaborative team. Clara's lips curled slightly as she stated that was not how audit frameworks work. Preston started to sweat. He argued that since I was no longer with the company, it was just a technical detail. Clara cut him off, pointing out that this meant their current compliance designation was invalid. She stated they were misrepresenting named authority, which meant every compliance claim since my departure was legally unsupported. A heavy silence followed, so thick that you could hear the air conditioning system click. Preston tried to call the legal department, but received no answer. Clara turned to her associate and requested the full compliance designation trail, including every board meeting minute, email record, and personnel log from the past 120 days. The associate immediately started typing. Preston stumbled over his words, arguing that the deal was closing tomorrow and that this was just a minor clerical oversight. Clara replied flatly that this was a major breach of due diligence, and unless it was resolved immediately, the entire deal would halt. Across town, at my co-working desk that smelled of toner and ancient pretzels, I refreshed the buyer's public filing portal. Nothing was updated yet, but I knew it was coming. I opened my personal inbox. Clara Mercer had found the email I had sent months ago, right before I toggled my certification status to inactive. The email contained my resignation letter, the compliance status logs, and the Section 9.7 notice. My cover note had clearly stated that no replacement, had been filed within the 14-day regulatory requirement, meaning that compliance authority remained unassigned. No reply had ever come back then, but now it was a smoking gun. Back in the glass room downstairs, Preston begged for more time. Clara was already on the phone with the buyer's general counsel. Words like exposure and malfeasance began to circulate. One of the buyer's internal lawyers scribbled a number on his legal pad, which was $25,000. That was the retroactive daily fine for operating out of compliance. Preston looked like a man trying to climb out of a grave he had dug with a plastic toy shovel. The board of directors was notified, and Richard Thorne was contacted while on his way from the airport. The senior legal partner was pulled out of a marketing lunch to urgently confirm the personnel transition logs. There was no quick fix, and there was no one left to blame. The deal was still on the calendar, but the blood was already in the water. I did not lift a finger. I just leaned back, closed my laptop, and smiled like a person who had left the fire escape instructions taped directly under the alarm. The final boardroom meeting did not start the way they had planned. It was supposed to be a victory lap, with handshakes, signatures, and champagne. The caterer stood outside with a tray of salmon and expensive wine. Then came the question: who revoked the named compliance officer? The question hit the room like an explosive device. The buyer's lead counsel, a tall man named Oliver Ward who had the expression of someone who had once sued federal regulators and won, stood up so fast that his chair slammed backward against the wall. Papers fluttered, and the chief executive officer flinched. Oliver repeated the question, holding up a printed copy of my original designation letter. He barked that he was looking at board minutes from the past 6 months, and my name did not appear once. There was no reassignment, no revocation, and no transition. He stated that I was still legally the named officer for their audit certification. Dead silence blanketed the room. HR coughed, and the legal team rustled their papers. Preston's face went bone white. Richard Thorne turned toward his CFO's son with a look of absolute horror. He spoke in a low, tight voice, asking Preston what he had done. Preston opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lips moved in silence. The deal was dead in the water by 11:47. The buyer's legal team packed up their folders, powered down their laptops, and walked out with practiced calm. Clara Mercer's parting words echoed through the room like a funeral bell, stating they were pausing the deal pending a full legal review, and instructing the company not to contact them until they had formal audit clarification. The boardroom immediately imploded. One of the independent directors stood up, veins bulging at his temples, demanding to know what had happened when they were hours from closing. The legal team looked as if they had aged 20 years in 5 minutes. One called external counsel, while another flipped through files, hoping answers would appear. No one could find a single document showing my replacement because none existed. Across the table, the chief financial officer tried to spin the situation, claiming it was a minor procedural issue and that the buyers would return. But a board representative from a venture fund snapped back that they would not, as they were currently calculating exposure and bleeding $25,000 a day in retroactive penalties. He calculated that 94 days out of compliance amounted to $2,350,000, and the cost was climbing. Richard Thorne finally snapped. He hissed, demanding to know where I was, and ordered someone to get Julian Finch on the phone. Preston, who was now ghost-pale and drenched in sweat, whispered that I did not work there anymore. Richard shot him a glare that could have stripped paint from the walls, telling Preston that he knew that, and ordering him to call, text, or find me on social media to fix the situation. Preston pulled out his phone and opened our last text thread, which consisted of a single note. He typed an urgent message asking me to clarify my compliance role for the board meeting. 3 dots appeared on his screen, then vanished. He tried to call twice, but both calls went straight to voicemail. He looked up, admitting that I was unreachable. Richard Thorne slammed his hand on the table, shouting that this was Preston's idea, that they did not need my services, and that he had claimed the structure was optimized. Preston croaked that he did not think the clause was enforceable, and that he assumed the legal team would catch it. One of the directors barked that the legal team does not write termination memos. Another director stood up, stating that if the sale failed, his fund was pulling all investments. He warned that they were looking at state-level penalties and potential federal inquiries. Brenda from Human Resources tried to offer context, whispering that they assumed the transition was informal since I had not protested. Richard shouted that I had indeed protested, leaving a binder in the legal archive labeled "Continuity Risk Do Not Shred." A junior lawyer ran to check and returned with the folder. Someone opened it, and there it was. My original designation letter, the clause, the 14-day rule, the signatures, and the compliance logs. Everything they had needed months ago was now sitting before them. One of the directors whispered that I had built the trap before I left. Richard sat back, defeated, stating that I was not the trap, but that Preston was. By 3:42 in the afternoon, the buyer's legal team returned, but not to close. Clara entered first, flanked by two compliance officers and Stephen Vance, the regulatory counsel. Stephen laid a document on the table, which was the original business continuity plan bearing my signature, and just beneath it, the last edit log. Preston had signed off on the updates without reading the text. Clara stated that they had reviewed the archive and read Section 9.7. She explained that representing compliance assurance to their board while out of audit standing was fraudulent deceit, a direct violation of California Civil Code Section 1709. Furthermore, because these false records were transmitted electronically to facilitate the transaction, it constituted a violation of federal wire fraud under Title 18. United States Code Section 1343. She stated this exposed the company and its board to class action liability, and that they were notifying the regulatory bureaus. Effective immediately, their purchase offer was rescinded pending a formal investigation. Preston whimpered something about an oversight, but no one listened. An investor stood up and declared the sale radioactive. Richard Thorne finally broke, complaining that I was supposed to be gone. Clara looked at him and said simply that I had followed protocol while they had not. Then the buyer's team walked out. By 4:07 in the afternoon, the press release was officially pulled. By 4:21, the regulatory inquiry was confirmed. By 4:38, Richard Thorne submitted his resignation, and at 5:02 in the afternoon, Preston was escorted out of the building by security. Across the street at my co-working space, I refreshed my inbox. I had a new message from Clara Mercer at Apex Holdings. The message asked if I was available to be retained for a post-deal compliance rebuild, noting that my insight into continuity architecture would be invaluable. The attached offer letter detailed a 6-month contract with a 6-figure salary and guaranteed autonomy. I typed one sentence in reply, stating that per clause 9.7, my designation was never reassigned. Then I closed my laptop. The sun was setting behind the skyline, casting long shadows across my former employer's building. I could see the boardroom lights still burning, with tiny figures inside scrambling to salvage the unsalvageable. I did not need to raise my voice. I wrote a clause. They ignored it, and when the reckoning came, they had no one to blame but themselves.